Hello, I am Siobhán McSweeney and I am an actor and I'm delighted to be here today. I am Mark.
Hi Siobhán, how are you? Well, let's get right to it. Siobhán, when you were growing up in Cork, was was it in your family? Was it something you're always into? Was it, what was it there for you, do you think?
No, no is the short answer. No, none of the rest of my family have pursued a career in the arts. That said, however, my paternal grandfather was a poet, an Irish language poet on Senior Cmeown, but I never knew him, and I only sort of knew him as the great man of letters, really. So I had no connection with that because I didn't even like English as a subject in school. In fact, I hated English in school. I didn't understand the you'd write an answer and it would be up for a opinion, and you're like, but either there's a right answer or a wrong answer. Shows my way of thinking. But I was sent to speech and drama classes and elocution classes when I was very young. Imagine the accent being stronger than this, and I got a love for it there, actually. But that said, my dad passed away there a year and a half ago, and I found something, and then my aunt passed away, and my aunt had a letter for me we found in the car after she died that she hadn't gotten around to posting to me. And in it was a clipping from a newspaper back in the 60s of Dad in an amateur production, Drámaíocht in San Hala. And there was a picture of him anyway with a hat and probably talcum powder in the hair. I didn't even have hair then, but very young, like in his 20s or whatever. So I think, and they were all into the amateur dramatics in San Gaeltacht, the Goulet, so
And
that sort of
is it well talked area, Siobhán, that you come from?
No, I grew up in Arhala, but it's not too far from Cooley, Ballymun.
And come here then, what was it like? Do you remember what it was like when you kind of found that, speech and drama, that from someone who kind of, as I said, hated the grey areas of the English language, and then went, oh, I like this though.
Yeah. I think I can specifically remember one poem that we had to do for an exam, and it was just a silly comic poem, which was in one of our English readers or whatever. But I remember from before that moment, just learning stuff off by rote. Good afternoon, sir, smash 'em up. We're having tea, do take a cup. Sugar and milk, now let me see. 2 lumps, I think. Good gracious me, the silly thing slipped off your knee. And for some reason, whatever it was about that poem, it suddenly got to me, and I suddenly realized it was a story, and I suddenly realized that if I pulled my face in a certain way, I could get a laugh. And that sort of opened up an awful lot of stuff, especially poetry, especially like being introduced to poetry from speech and drama classes. You feel like there's some sort of secret, don't you? Like I think when people are in the arts, they know what I mean. It feels like a secret sometimes, you're like, oh yeah, not something surrounded with shame or having to hide it from something, but that there's a secret language, that there's something else, maybe.
Yeah.
Also, I liked showing off. I liked standing in front of people and declaiming.
Did you? I mean, was that something kind of like the confidence bit was there to kind of get up and do it?
I think it was a combination of confidence and genuinely probably a bit of a lack of social skills as well, like not understanding that. Also, I think it comes down to shyness. Like the thing I love about about acting is that I'm not being myself, and the great relief that comes with that, without being all dark about it or anything. But there is a great relief to be able to escape yourself for a while. And even if you're play acting, which is what you're doing as a kid, even when you're pretending, it's a great relief.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think, that fact that the artist, or being a child that never grew up, or kind of or a child that was able not to fully grow up, And the sense that
Yeah.
did you have that imaginary life for yourself when you were kind of younger? Like, when you found speech and drama, and then were you kind of, were you declaiming all over the place?
No. I was yeah, claiming all over the place. I was I mean, I don't want to self-mythologize or anything, but I don't think I was very socially adept. And I read quite a lot.
Okay.
And so I would disappear that sort of way.
Okay.
And I loved playing, but possibly wasn't very good at it. Like I don't know. You'd have to ask people at the time. I mean, like I was talking to a school friend a couple of years ago, and I was like, God, I was so nervous all the time in secondary school. And she was like, you were the most confident, loud, brash person ever. And I'm like, just goes to show, doesn't it? What you feel and what you show.
I think as well, and I think it's kind of, one of the secrets, or one of the things that's kind of, being in the arts, particularly around actors and acting, is that what you see a lot of times isn't what is going on. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's a great kind of, it's a great kind of eye-opener in the world generally, that, like, and it's an old hackneyed phrase, like, never judge a book by its cover, or never judge a book by its actions. What were you reading, Siobhán, around that time? Was there kind of particular books that you remember kind of guzzling into? Was there?
I read a lot of fantasy stuff, a lot of like starting off with Narnia. I stopped when it got to The Hobbit because I just went, no one needs to know all those. No, fuck that. But it got to a point, I was really into mythology, actually. I was really in Celtic mythology, a lot of those sort of fantasy stuff. Then it got to a point where I'd sort of run out of things to read. So Mum would send me off into the bookshelves in the television room and let me have a route around there. And there was a really interesting sort of library, couple of shelves of books that they had, because Mam was a voracious, we were all really good readers, but so we'd end up, I'd have something about Audrey Pierce, then there would be, Mam had all of James Baldwin stuff, and then like Price of My Soul was a big deal. Bernadette Devlin book. Lots of things that were a bit too old for me, frankly. I stopped. I'm making myself sound like a right wanker, and I probably was. Hence the lack of social skills is what I'm saying. But like I remember like trawling through Crime and Punishment at 13. I just started secondary school and just going, fuck this. I cannot make head nor tail of it. So I literally stopped reading for years then.
Yeah.
Unless I did it for school, I didn't do it at all.
Okay, and so then was kind of, because obviously you ended up going to study acting and speech and drama. Like, was that kind of growing in secondary school? Were you kind of aware that your nose was heading in that direction, or was it after that?
No, I didn't like English in secondary school. We had great teachers, but I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. I liked doing essays and stuff, but I didn't like, writing essays on Austen or whatever. I liked science. I enjoyed science and maths, so I knew, I sort of presumed it was that way I was going to go. I started youth theatre, graffiti.
Yeah.
It started Activate when I was in secondary school, so we were the first graduates, first years of it.
Yeah. So
I was doing that once a week, and that was sort of blowing my mind, because we just played and played and played, and that was heaven. But I didn't sort of link up being able to do that, hoping I'd be able to do that for the rest of my life, and also knowing that, when you think about kids, like, you're professional scholars, like that's what you do. I was longer being a student than I was doing anything else, really. Like, it's a 9-to-5er, so you don't connect the two. So it was interesting when I came over here to study and find out that in secondary schools that you have drama as an actual subject for their A-levels, like we don't have it for the leaving, and it's not really included. As far as I know, I could be wrong. It's a long time since I was in school.
Yeah.
But we don't introduce the idea of drama, theatre and performance in media as a separate thing to being able to write about.
Yeah. Actually, then that jump from Cork to London, I mean, was that a big jump? Yes.
Yeah, that was a huge jump. Yeah, I was in UCC doing biological and chemical sciences, and in my final year of that, I just had enough. I wasn't happy, Mark. I really wasn't happy at all. Um, Again, it's like that secret, you know, when you're like, I'm just in the wrong place. Not corporate, like no, this isn't this. I still have a chance. So I applied for drama schools, and I got in. And it was that weird thing where, like, suddenly all the fretting and all the worry and everything, the decision sort of was made at that point. You know, oh, I've got a place. I suppose I'm going then. And that's how it was introduced to mum and dad as well. I'm off, I think. Bye, I suppose.
Yeah.
And because it wasn't too far, like,
Yeah.
you know, you could be like, I'll be back next week.
Yeah. Little did you know.
Little did I know.
But also, I mean, there's a mix. You trained there, and also, was it Philip Gollier? Is that the way you pronounce it? Was there?
Yeah.
Tell me about those kind of different spaces.
Yeah. So after drama school, like the drama school training I had was quite classical in a way, sort of conservatoire training, quite classically based, very text based. Great training altogether at Central School of Speech and Drama. But as a result, I approached work from that sort of classical aspect, and trying to see myself within the classical canon to a certain extent, and not being able to see it, actually still not being able to see where I fit in. But as I started working, more and more parts I was getting, more and more sort of work I was becoming more interested in, had a more of a physical edge to them, more of a non-textual basis. So I ended up doing a clowning while I was doing one of my first jobs in London. I did a workshop during the day in clowning, and at the end of that, Clive Mendes from Complicité said you should really consider going to Philippe Gaulier in Paris. So I'm very biddable. So off I went to Paris.
How long were you in Paris for?
It wasn't that long at all, a couple of months, but it was long enough.
Yeah.
It was very intense. It was incredibly intense, and a very different a very different style, but also teaching style, because there was no real teaching done. It was just an asshole of a man at the back of the room beating a drum when you weren't funny and you had to get off the stage. And you know, first 2 weeks you just. But what it did give you, it was still an incredible experience, and one I'm still learning from. It taught me about failure, and not in the, oh, because you were crap. It's like, no, because of the actual jewels that comes from failure, understanding and not being scared of failure. I only wish I could hang on to it. I mean, but don't you think, Mark, if you can hang on to not being scared of failure, like not in a superficial way, like I don't care what the reviews say. I'm talking about like when you're in the moment, when you're actually on stage, or when the camera's in front of you, to be fearless, in a controlled and generous manner is the aim, isn't it?
That's beautifully put, and it also is that. I completely agree with you, and it's that kind of trick to kind of divest yourself of kind of ego as well, and not be afraid of kind of doing that, because that's where the fear comes. And I think, you know, it's you mentioned there about, you know, as a young person, as many people do, you know, have play as somewhere to kind of, you know, find themselves by not being themselves in a way for a time, but in a way as one gets older, it's still the same mechanism. You try and not be yourself, and I don't mean in any kind of arsey way of you know, not being yourself, but of letting that ego place go. And that's very scary. And that's, but also, I mean, you know, obviously, you know, your career has, you know, in one way, it's kind of exploded in a known way in the last 3 or 4 years. But in those early years in London, you were doing some exceptional work with like, you know, with great companies. You know, and I think, how did that happen? I mean, like when you left college and kind of did the training, you know, for people that don't know, I mean, you've a renown as a stage actress, as well as your kind of, you know, your in the more public perception as TV and film actress. How did that kind of happen? You know, at that moment of leaving college, going, "Oh crap, what's going to happen now?"
And it really was a moment of, oh crap, what's going to happen now? I went to Central, and in my year there was less than 30 of us, and 3 of us left without agents. I was one of them. And that's very much a death knell. That's the first hurdle you fall. You've not cleared that one. The second hurdle I crashed straight through, dragging down half the scenery, was my mother got ill, and I moved back to Cork, and she had a short enough illness, and then she passed away. So the shiniest time you have as an actor is when you launch, and it's your debutante, when you're a graduate. Everybody wants, because they're all out there, they all want the next new thing, you know. And it was decided that I wasn't the next new thing, and then it was decided that I couldn't even be in London. I couldn't even be in Dublin. I was in Cork, which was totally fine, but it meant that, like, for the next year or so, I ended up getting a job in theatre in Manchester, and then over the next couple of years managed to make it back down to London, where I worked in I've worked in a lot of theatres here, primarily the National. Actually, I got one job there, and then luckily managed to stay on for a couple of more, which was an amazing experience, because I sort of feel, in a lot of ways, it's great to have, you know, hindsight is 20/20, as they say, but it's great to be able to literally start from nothing and to work your way up, because, and it doesn't always happen, but none of it really happens. But it means now for me that if and when a bad dry spell or global pandemic happens, that I have the inner resources to be able to handle it. Whereas I have friends, often a lot of young, good-looking fellas who went straight out from drama schools and went, boom, and, you know, that's not always going to last. And you worry about their own inner resources. I mean, I don't worry too much about young, good-looking men in the business. So that's my worry, frankly.
That was my next question, but you've answered it for me. Come here to me, but like, just to pick you up on something, you said you did a couple of shows in the National. You did 5 shows in the National Theatre, and, you know, the work you did around that time, you know, the directors that you were working with in the show. I mean, you mentioned classics earlier on. I mean, you know, and how you'd fit in there. I mean, like, As You Like It, Mother Courage, you know, like.
They were all missing a girl from Cork. Yeah. Who knew?
No, but I mean, but as I say, like, you don't accidentally get cast in 5 parts in the National. You know, there's something there that obviously was seen, and around those, you know, and since that time, you know, you've done. I mean, the first time I saw you on stage was in Katie Roach in the Abbey, which was a brilliant production, and you shone completely. And I think it's. But I think there's a, for people that might know you from Derry Girls, there's a whole other thing going on there that brings, I think, the brilliance of that character, which is the depth of believability. Do you know what I mean? That it's not just a comic turn. And I think, I mean, I don't want to talk about Derry Girls yet, because we end up just talking about Derry Girls. I'm trying to hold myself back from it. But
I'm with you. Yeah, let's.
But that piece around, you know, and I think it's worth talking about, you know, the likes of Luna said, the likes of Uncle Vanya, then the lyric, like, you know what I mean? They're, you know, the canon. And I suppose, was that as an actress kind of starting out, was that an amazing thing to be part of, those kind of ensemble national places?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. People scoff at, like, the luxury of being able to learn whilst being paid and being on stage. People bemoan the lack of the rep system here, and there's pros and cons to it, but the one thing that I'm always really sad about when it comes to my industry in particular is that I always say Dylan was allowed his Christian album. Actors have to be Oscar worthy every time, and they're not allowed to have their Christian album. They're not allowed to bore with bootleg tapes. Yes, I'm sick of him, but but there's that there's nothing out of there are small parts. That sort of idiom of like, oh, there's no such thing as small parts. There are small parts, and there are very undeserving parts, and they're very unsatisfying or whatever. But a lot of just to work. The main thing is to work, to get your muscle going, to get your strength up, to get your, like, what people still think that if your name isn't on the poster, and that if you're not somebody off the telly, that you're not an actor, that you're a deluded waitress. There's a whole industry, it's an industry, and I think that's the one thing about COVID. People are slowly beginning to realize how so many aspects of the industry involve so many different skills. And especially in London, just by virtue of the size of the place, you have an industry where people are working and working and working, and you'll never, ever hear them, but they'll be in that thing you love. They're also in the other thing you love. And they were also in that, but they were completely different. And what that is that's a proper gymnasium. You're getting to work, you're getting to live, and that's the job. That's the real job. Like the Sister Michaels and stuff of the world are the cherry on top, are the incredible Santa comes every single day amazingness. But the actual job is the 8 shows a week, is going from the canon to a devised show to a workshop to everything. Does that sort of answer your question? I feel as if I went off on one.
Yeah, well, it absolutely does. And I think there's a sense of that work, and also things happening at different speeds, whereas you're kind of getting an awful lot of work and living in the UK and kind of, traveling around the UK and coming back here for shows. But also then, you're also, from all the actors I've spoken to, you're kind of then starting off trying to dip your toe in film and TV and getting bits in here and bits there, and kind of, so that balancing act, you're right. And that's part of the reason why we started these Access Chats, was to give both people in the industry a chance to have a chat to each other, but also the public to kind of realize that people are human, whether they work in the arts or not. They kind of, it's a career rather than, oh, that you're one off the telly, or this is, that people, and I think those misperceptions are kind of huge.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and when going back on like places like the National and the Lyric, but actually to exclude work in the north of Ireland, because I haven't worked in the Republic at all, hardly. You say you saw me in Katie Roach, and that was, I think, the first time I would have worked in the Republic for a decade, maybe. Like, so my experience is very much UK based, because I haven't been able to get a job back home.
Yeah.
And that's as much a reality of the career as well, as the cherry on top.
Yeah. And can we talk? Like, when we'll go back to the theatre in a minute. But then when you kind of start off, film and TV, they're two very, very different things. But did you find that, because you speak very viscerally there about kind of muscle and kind of, that piece about acting, do you find, that the physical training, and particularly, around the physicality piece, I'm most fascinated that, whereas you bring that to a more intimate space, can be as valuable. It's about restraint rather than, and do you find that kind of has been a benefit to you in the more media side of things, in the TV and film?
I have, yeah, because it is about that restraint. It's also about, I think we forget perhaps how much of our visual media is a visual form. So you're talking about shapes, and you're talking about the shapes you pull as a person, not perhaps funny faces, but almost in a way it's more important than in theatre, because you need to know your body so well. You need to know how to be able to pull a shape like a curved line or a straight line that will evoke a reaction and add to all the information you're getting from a flat screen. Like if you think about the information that comes out of these things, and they're essentially just moving, well, they are moving pictures. Whereas in the theatre, you get the smell, you get the sound, you have people beside you, the air is around. So you have almost a bigger job in front of a computer in giving a visual clue as well as a verbal clue, and of course all that physical side. Everything leads to the same place. It's just they're just different tools. But like any kind of, you know, sort of if you focus on one, the other withers kind of thing. You need to balance in the force there is. You need to approach it every way.
Yeah, I think because I mean you know in the last, like say in the 3 or 4 years before kind of Dairy Girls kind of happened, you know, you had a continual part in the fall. You know, you worked previously with Lisa on London Irish as well, and you know, I remember reading an interview with you a while back, and it said that script of London Irish, you kind of, that was, I can see you smiling now, that was one of the funniest things that you kind of read, and that kind of, it was, yeah. And what was it about her writing even back then, Siobhán, that kind of you went?
She, again, all roads lead to the same place. She has a brilliant sense, well, of everything, but in particular, there is a rhythm to her writing, and if you hit the rhythm the same way, like an actual physical rhythm, you hit the gag. You know, so she is so forensic in what she writes. You cannot but get the gag in at that point. Do you know what I mean? It's a piece of music. Also, she has a real interest in, like, her characters are extraordinary because she takes the mundane and makes them ridiculous and surreal. Also, on a personal level, I personally love that sort of woe-begone, like in London Irish, you have Packy, Peter Campion's character, is sort of the straight man, even though he's, you know, absolutely hilarious himself. But the outside eye of looking at these things and going, this is stupid, like, you're all behaving stupid. Sort of put upon person. It just, as a conceit, it makes me laugh quite a lot. Yeah, she's great. But you know, like, she's known for Dairy Girls and Northern Irish, but she's just got the Deceived out. You know, she did Indian Summers, I think, like, and Raw. Yeah, she's very talented.
Yeah,
sick of her.
But I think as well, you know, that comedic sense. I mean, you know, you say you keep also saying, you're right, that it all comes from the same place or from the same type of thing. And I think an awful lot of time that people throw comedy into a bucket, that's kind of, you're comedic, or you're this, or you're funny, or you're that, and you're kind of going, yeah, that's not necessarily the case, you know, in relation to, it's about the material and the surrounds kind of around you, but also some of the best comedy, but the ones that I love, come from a place that's very dark. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of
yeah, me too.
And I think, you know, from being part of, say, the classics, as you were kind of evolving as an actress. I mean, Katie Roach, not exactly, you know, a very funny play, you know, but yet, you know, but then as you move into, say, approaching Dairy Girls, like, it's a very funny and brilliantly funny series, but it's set within a context that's not funny at all, both from the macro Northern Ireland situation, but also the school you run isn't exactly the most funny place in the world.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think that goes back to sort of perhaps a bigger point that I may think about comedy in general, which is that comedy is intrinsically linked to our humanity. And so you mentioned, like, Katie Roach, the character I played, I mean, you're right, it's not a funny play. It's not a funny play at all. There were laughs, and there were heartbreaking laughs in that play, heartbreaking laughs. I remember at one point I came out as my character, and I think it was with the scones or something, but it was something I said, and I remember after the show going for a cry, actually. I was so moved by the laughter. you can tell different kinds of laughter. And it was the laughter of women of a certain age who were together. And it was a laughter of recognition. And it broke my heart. It absolutely broke my heart. Because these were women who were laughing at, oh my God, she's coming out with the scones. That's exactly what you do, Mary. It is. I'm mad for the scones, you know. But what they were laughing was going, I'm not putting stuff on, because there was something that was said afterwards that shows that sort of, my God, life is scones. It's hard to put, but
I know what you mean.
A laugh is a gateway into our base, beautiful, fragile humanity. And I think things like Derry Girls is so important, because the laughter leads you in to these darker things. You talked about Uncle Vanya before. I mean, most things in the canon do have something there. Most great things do have gateways. Uncle Vanya, the adaptation, the translation I did was of course Friel's, because his translations are the best ones. And if you look at the difference between Friel's and any of the other ones, genuinely, is the laughs. They're the laughs.
Yeah.
And they get closer to the humanity and the absolute complexity of our ridiculous situation of being alive, far closer than some skinny fella staring out a window crying.
Yeah. No, but I think you're right. But I think you just, that, to me, you know, having grown up in Ireland, that, you know, experienced, you know, from a southern way, all that's going on, or, you know, goes on in the Derry Girls, and
yeah,
kind of go, it's brilliantly dark and actually, you know, quite radical in some ways, to be laughing in that space. And I think it's kind of, you know, it's generational. Do you know what I mean? I think that's why it's so brilliantly the young people are the center of, you know, surrounded by these people who are having very different experiences of things, but that's not being focused on. And that's what I love about it, because for people who've experienced that, at those times, I'm looking at you and, like, you know, Tommy and all the, you know, I'm kind of going, yeah, there's a whole lot of the world they're not telling those kids. And that's brilliant. And it's so there in the writing without it being a reading through the years bit. Do you know what I mean? That it's kind of, and then you kind of go to the religious aspect of it, which is so brilliantly caught in its hilarity, but also in that brilliant character that you've made. That's so multi-layered, and that's what makes her so funny, and yet so you end up fucking empathizing with the woman. Do you know what I mean? You kind of go, and like, I suppose, how did that come about for you, Siobhán? I mean, like, was it kind of, what was the process to that? What was the process rehearsal-wise? Like, was it something that kind of you read and went, oh my God, yes?
Yeah. Yeah. That's that's the long and short of it, really. I read it and I knew instinctively what that character was, and I found out subsequently that I may have slightly, that you know, Lisa did know me when she was writing it,
right? Because
of Irish. But I mean, that's not a given. It's you know, writers don't have any power, but nothing was a given. But I you know, I had to audition, and I had to convince producers and directors and the whole lot that. But if I didn't get it, if I hadn't gotten it, it wouldn't have been that I wouldn't have come away going, oh damn it, oh I didn't get that, I mustn't have got it right. I knew I understood her.
Right.
I know I understand her. I really understand her. Yeah. And what's wonderful is that the way people respond to her and every character, and it shows how well they're written, people always think that she's based on somebody. Oh, you must have known my headmistress. Oh, and you're like, never met a nun in my life. Like, everybody thinks that that she's somebody who taught them or something. And that just shows how something incredibly specific and forensic can be so universal, which is exactly what the show does. You couldn't get more specific. Imagine pitching a show. I'd like to pitch a comedy about the Troubles and have nothing, and it'd be all set around girls in a Catholic convent school. Yeah, it's going to go down a storm in Brazil. In fact, it does go down a storm in Brazil.
Yeah.
And Iran, actually. I've gotten letters from Iran, I think. Yeah.
But I think
Mad.
But I think what you said there, and you know, the specific nature, I think, of the way you've spoken about your own process, you know, in your work on a technical basis.
Yeah.
Coupled with the specificity of the context, and then you say with Lisa's, you know, forensic kind of writing, I'm really amazed that people don't understand enough that kind of, you know, if you make, the more specific you make something, the more universal it is. Because we all have those people in our lives at some point, or we were those people, or not even that we were those people, we recognize a part of Sister Michael's character that Jesus, that's a bit like me, you know what I mean? That kind of, and did you know, I mean, like filming it, did you get a sense of how good it was when you were kind of doing it?
Yes, but we had no sense that it would be a success.
Yeah.
It's another thing that people just don't realize, that there are loads of things that are brilliant that don't get a second series, or don't even get to air, or nobody comes and sees the shows.
Yeah.
And they should know that, because it accounts for so much of the if so much good stuff doesn't get seen, by that same logic, so much shite is seen. And there is an awful lot of shit out there, and an awful lot of bad writers, bad actors, bad directors. And that's the reason, because the complete and utter lack of meritocracy within the industry. And for that reason, and that reason alone, that's why we hoped it would be a success. But even some of the girls straight out of drama school, they were like, even we know we can hope.
Yeah.
We can hope. And I think actually people are now revisiting things like London Irish, which, as I said before, and I'll say again, has some of the funniest scripts I've ever read in my entire life. And they're revisiting it now, and they're absolutely adoring it. Whereas at the time, it didn't get recommissioned. And you go, well, what's the difference?
Yeah.
There's no rhyme or reason. But I do think with Derry Girls, I've said before, we did have an audience waiting, and we do have, you know, I have this sort of theory that we have created our own audience, not Derry Girls, but as an industry, as artists create their own audiences. And specifically in theatre, we have an awful lot to answer for, actually. We clutch our pearls in absolute outrage when we hear that a member of the public has written to the RSC or whoever because they're disgusted that there's a person of colour playing Hamlet or something, or that the three sisters have three sisters from three different ethnicities. Yeah. All that bollocks. We sort of go, oh my God, the public are so ignorant. We do not take responsibility for the fact that we have trained our audience. We have trained them to believe that unless men in tights speak with certain vowel sounds and have a different pigment in their skin, that only they are allowed to play things like this. We have trained them to believe that somebody with a so-called regional accent will automatically have to be a maid. We've trained them to say that, like, there's a fucking logic to putting a Denmark prince next, you know, like, there's no, we can't have it both ways. We cannot say that we are slightly better than our audiences, in that we're more progressive and it's our job to teach, when we have taught them. They're incredibly fluent. They're incredibly fluent in a visual language that dates back from a long, long time, which is the problem. And it's up to us to change that language.
Yeah, I mean, that's brilliantly put. And you can see it as well. I mean, because I think you mentioned, because I think, you know, a lot of work kind of like say from where I work from here, and kind of a lot of people that kind of have work, you kind of you run the risk of like, because we used to get, oh God, isn't it great, there's an art centre in Ballymun. You're kind of going, sorry, what? Like, what? You know, that's kind of, and if you kind of push too far into it, it becomes a real othering. So, you know, you kind of going, no, it's not about having all these diversity departments over here, you know, whereas we leave the mainstream intact. It's about kind of going, well, look, you made that point brilliantly. You basically create what you create. Do you know what I mean? It's no accident. And I think as well, because there's been an absolute, and Derry Girls have been part of it, there's been an absolute kind of bringing down of the walls with writers between film and TV. You know, like you couldn't imagine a decade ago that the quality of work coming out of television would be the way, you know, that it's now the place to work. It's kind of like what happened. It's kind of like what happened in the UK with like the Royal Court and the Donmar or whatever in the last 30 years. And I think there's an audience for that will believe everything as long as it's done with truth, with dignity, and for the right reasons.
That's it. And I think people are beginning to look around and go, really? Are these the stories? There are no other stories. Nope, no other stories. Really? Okay, we can give you this story and you can do it, but it's still the same story. No other stories, no other stories. And that's totally been you get one little thing. I'm not sort of going to say that Derry Girls open the floodgates, far from it. I'm really not. And But the fact that the most immediate thing that people could say after that was like, oh, it's the female in-betweeners. Is it fuck? Is it fuck the female in-betweeners? Like it's a sort of way of trying to own an experience which doesn't have a comparison.
Yeah.
Because like recently with I May Destroy You, I mean that might as well going like I'll burn the fucking house down. I mean that show has, why was there a conditional there? It has destroyed. It has destroyed, and from the ashes something beautiful will come. Because I think now people will go, I didn't realize I was missing that. You know, I didn't realize I needed that story. I didn't realize that I could feel a complexity and sort of allow my eyes to see things that I hadn't seen before, like you know, race, gender, class, like so many stories we've missed out. That's what pisses me off. We've lost so many stories.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I think the I May Destroy You is you know, a really good point, you know, a really good moment in time, because also I think there's been this, and it's kind of, has it been in the arts for like centuries, this sense of we are the knowledge bearers, and you're kind of going, actually no you're not, you know, it's you might be the transmuters or the translators, but the complexity you mentioned, the comedy and the complexity of life, but that's, people are the complex ones. Do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of, oh you wouldn't understand this. You're kind of going, well then you've done it wrong. Sorry.
Yeah. Yes.
And I absolutely don't mean that everything has to be, you know, put out there in paint by colors, because I think I Will Destroy You is probably the most understandable, relatable piece, but in its complexity, and that it exists on a visceral level rather than it being what's going on there, because you kind of you know. But I think also that works. I mean, I think, you know, Derry Girls has that kind of going on as well, because it plays with, it's like, you know, Jack Charlton has been buried today, you know, that sense of that time in Ireland, you know, the late 80s, early 90s, that the people of generation, most people alive over a certain age remember that time. So you're kind of going, it plays with those cultural kind of references.
It does.
And it brilliantly, comedically plays with them all. And I think as well, because it's so much set in the north and all that's going on, the whole religious aspect of it hasn't been kind of, you know, not spoken about as much as the politics. But the convent, you know, is just this amazing space that's ruled by your character, but but it's kind of, you can't find it. It's not just Iron Fist. It's not at all that. And I think, you know, that the empathy of her, I suppose, that's something that you hold. Is that important to you, that there is an empathetic side to the character?
Mm. No, it's not important to me that a character I play, any character, is liked, but it is important to me that I give, that I like the character. And and also that I respect the character. Not that that it's a character that should be respected, but that I, as the one wearing her bones, will respect that. And empathy is an interesting word when it comes to that, actually. I think you have a respect and an obligation to show a realized person and to serve the script and the situation. And the more colors you have, the greater the depth of vision.
Yeah. And
also, I think throwing that back on the audience again, the more colors you have, without drenching the palette, to use the extended metaphor, but we have such an intelligent audience. And if I can go back slightly, because I think it slightly relates to this point, you talked about like the sort of custodians of knowledge. When I've done a few gigs at the Royal Court, which is my favorite theatre in the world, which is ironic because they call it the writers' theatre, but as a performer, it's a beautiful place to work in. That said, I haven't been to Ballymun yet, so. But every show I've done there has not been particularly rated. Well, what am I saying? A pair of them have been slated quite ferociously, ferociously in the recognised general press, by the critics, by these great custodians of knowledge, these great protectors, these denizens of taste. And every night I would take a bow to people standing up, to kids cry, kids. I'm in my 40s, anyone younger than 39. To people like laughing and sobbing and jumping to their feet. They understood. And I'm not making it an age issue, but our audience understood what we were doing, and our critics did not understand what we were doing. And you sort of go, who do you believe? Who do you believe? Also, when it comes, like, to bring it back to empathy, then your job is to let the audience go on this journey with you. If you do that, it's a bit like costume designers and sound designers. If you notice their work, they're not doing a good job. The actor is sort of the conduit for the audience. And I think empathy is actually what you feel towards her.
Yes.
You know, something that you've created. I can't play it and I can't create it, but I can use a whole load of different tools so you feel that as you're watching it and it goes through me.
Yeah. Brilliantly put. And then you, as that person, what must that have been like when suddenly it went bang? When suddenly, you know, within such a short space of time, it was this cultural phenomenon.
Yeah. I mean, I still don't understand it. Like, I think it's so out of my own personal experience. For example, when season 1 came out, I was working in a deli. Worst person, never hire me. I'm awful. You can ask, I'm the Henry Ford of coffees. You can ask for whatever coffee you want. But what you're getting is the same milky slop I'm throwing out into everything. And it got to a point where the sort of fancy people of East London were clicking their fingers, demanding their their stupid sandwiches, and then realizing that the show they were talking about was serving them. A lot of eye rolls behind that counter, I tell you. You know, so it's very hard. It was very hard to understand. And also then you get that whole, that weird feeling of going, I'm working in a deli and people are saying that I'm off the telly. I'm off the deli, not the telly. Like, and you know yourself, we all have this shared idea of what somebody off the telly is like. Mm. And I was like, but I can't be off the telly because my feet are exhausted from doing an 8-hour shift at work, and I have to get the night bus home now. You know, like, it didn't match up. And then there's been loads of other shiny things that have happened subsequently. And if I'm honest, all they've done is just show how silly it all is, really. I can't comprehend it. I like some of the shiny stuff, but the shiny stuff is only nice, you know, when you believe that it's real. Once you see the strings behind it, you go, all right, okay.
But I mean, that recognition piece, I mean, as I said, like, in series 2 came quite, you know, there was a kind of, it was a role in the series, and then series 2 even brought it, you know, further, and suddenly internationally, you know, came. But that recognition, I mean, suddenly you are recognized, I'd imagine.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't been back to Ireland, obviously. Well, I haven't been back to Ireland. This is the longest I haven't been in Ireland ever in my life.
Right.
I haven't been back since October last year, November. Right. So I live in the countryside. I do get recognised, yeah, and it's always a bit weird. It's lovely that people like the show, but I haven't caught up with what other people think of me when they see me.
Yeah. Which is probably good.
I don't know if it's good or bad. It is what it is, and it's not that I'm being like modest, because it doesn't feel, and it's not that I'm being faux modest either, which is more disgusting.
Yeah.
It just it doesn't make there's one bad thing about it, I will say, is that I suddenly am always when I remember it, I sometimes get a little bit nervous that people are watching, or that I have to be nice all the time.
Yeah.
Or that they only want to talk to me because of a reason. I remember going to a party and I didn't really know people at it. So I did what I normally did, which is steal a load of booze and start drinking in the kitchen to anybody who was there. And I ended up chatting to these 2 young fellas and having a great night. Oh, we had such a laugh. And then at the end, he leant over and he said, by the way, I really love you in the show. And my heart sank. And it's not like, he did nothing wrong. It was a lovely thing to say, and I'm glad he said it, and I'm really glad he likes the show. But suddenly the night felt like I'd been conned or something. It's a hard thing to explain. Do you know what I mean?
I don't know personally, obviously, what you mean, but I can imagine that, and also particularly in the age of social media, and also because you're vocal, you know what I mean? You kind of, you know, and I think that, so watching one's P's and Q's while you're not watching your P's and Q's in a way must be very difficult. Do you know what I mean? In relation to having that, you know, life that you can respond to things as any human being would, but your voice becoming more amplified because of the situation that you find yourself in. That's tricky, I'd imagine.
It is exactly. You've put it, and I am incredibly vocal, and I mean, I think I'm probably done now. I don't know how to change. Like, I've done all the growing I can do, really. I mean, I remember going to an Alliance for Choice meeting in Derry last year, and just going to the meeting, sitting in the back, and then putting my hand up because I was thinking about how we could distribute leaflets and blah, 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 and realizing halfway through my highly intelligent thought about leaflets, they didn't give a like, I wasn't there to hand out leaflets. Of course I wasn't there to hand out leaflets. I was there to have a photograph, to cheer people on and to raise awareness. I'm like, oh yeah, I can't and it's sort of like I can't hand out leaflets anymore. I can't. Yeah.
Yeah. And come into me, the one of the, like in Ireland, one of the other plays you did, which connected you obviously to seemingly someone who's had an influence on writing in you, is Autumn Royal, Kevin Barry with Dan and the Everyman. So tell me about, I mean, you know, where did the writing thing come in from that? Like, explain to me.
Well, Autumn Royal is Kevin Barry's first specifically written for stage play. I think there prior to that there had been a few adaptations of existing short stories and stuff like that, but this was the one that he wrote specifically for the play, and it was a co-production with the Everyman in Cork, and I did that, and apart from loving it, and it's where I met Katrina McLaughlin as well, and we just, you know, we've been trying to keep that sort of artistic dialogue going as well, because I think it was only wonderful.
Oh, she's the best.
Yeah, she is. She's the bee's bollocks. But Kevin, as is Kevin's, as we all know, fantastic. And after our run of Autumn Royal, he asked me with Olivia, his partner, to contribute to Winter Pages, which is their anthology that comes out every year, and they asked me to do an actor's diary, and it was the first time anyone had ever asked me to write stuff, and I went, no thanks, I'm a actor. And I look back on that now, and I think I was very wary about it, because the one sort of stereotype that you get when you're over here that I don't necessarily disagree with is that everybody in Ireland is a writer, and I'm like, no, we're not. But what we are, we're an incredibly literate country.
Yeah.
People read like everybody, regardless. You don't have to be interested in literature or the arts to read in Ireland. Here, it is an indication of your job and who you want to present yourself as being. I can tell you the difference is just immense. It's the one thing I will say is definitely there. But I think because of that, we all know what good writing is. We all know what good writing is, which is why I'm often sneery in places here. How did this go on? We all know what good writing is. And as a result, I didn't want to put myself up in it to be good. And then I had an epiphany. I don't have to be good. And suddenly I was able to write. And I looked around, and they sort of say, use great literature to inspire you, use great art to inspire you. The opposite has worked for me. Use really mediocre art to inspire you. Use stuff that's sort of grand, like, it'll do. That's sort of been my MO since. And I have found I've really quite enjoyed challenging myself with, as I call it, contributing to the mediocrity. I feel that I can, and I feel that I should contribute to the mediocrity rather than the greatness, because nobody should be, wouldn't it be annoying to be in your early 40s, look 21, but actually can't believe it, she's in her early 40s, and then to realize that I'm a marvelous writer, that would be, it's like, well, why didn't you do it earlier, so instead I'm really enjoying the process of doing it. Turns out I have a couple of things to say, and it turns out when you're writing you don't have to repeat yourself, unlike in conversation or up on a soapbox or arguing.
That's interesting that it's caught an ether, that it's kind of, that you said it and it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And come here, so then how has that manifested itself, Siobhán, in the last couple of years? What sort of writing have you done?
So I am in the process of writing a pilot for telly. God, it sounds grown up, but I mean, Then the pandemic came along, and I realized I really had run out of excuses. I was like, I just don't have the time.
Yes.
I have nothing but time. But yeah, I want to, I've been writing that steadily for a while, and of course it's a mess now, so I have to leave it go for a while, and then I'll come back to it. And I enjoy the process of doing it.
Yeah.
I also feel like how do I put it? Like there's an obligation there, really. Once you realize that things are fucked and you're one of the lucky ones, there is a moral obligation, isn't there?
Well, it's interesting. Sorry, it's funny because I've had a lot of conversations with that in the last couple of years, both in here as an organization, but also in life generally. I was asked about 2-3 years ago to be on a panel of Corlin and O, kind of these young children, kids, who've been out, and they've been out with city council and they've been out with government, and they've been kind of, asking them all questions, and they're amazed, it's great, and they're brilliant kids. And then they had a panel of people in the arts to talk to. And one guy, he's about 12, 13 at the time, brilliant, just one of these minds, you're kind of like, that guy's going to go a long way in life. But he said, it's such an amazing thing to get to talk to people who kind of run things, and, and be, I was on the panel going, do I say something? Do I not? And the point was kind of fermenting in my head, and it's kind of really, really kind of triggered an awful lot of stuff that, for me, it influenced me over the last decade, really. It's kind of going, well, there's a choice to be made that, we all agree society is broken. So then we have to figure out whether it's broken on purpose or because we're all shite at our jobs. And if you believe it's broken on purpose, then it's easier to change, because then someone's doing it. But if you believe we're all shite at our jobs, then fuck it, it's a mess. It's going to be a mess. Then let it be. There's no point in wasting, good. But if it's broken on purpose, then that's in some ways more scary to kind of get over the fact that it's broken on purpose. But actually, it's easier to fix. And actually, then even further than that, it's not broken on purpose by any individuals. It's broken on purpose by a system that was put in place 400 or 500 years ago.
Yeah. Yep.
And as you mentioned about critics, those denizens kind of grabbing onto a system because it's the only one they understand.
But also, not only that, it's the one that profits them.
There you go. In whatever way, whether it's by power, whether it's by denigrating certain, people, whatever it is, it's how it recompenses them in how they get their kicks.
That's it exactly. I don't know when this. Is this live?
No, I'm recording this.
When this will go out, but next Sunday I've written. One of the Sunday papers has asked for Ask an Expert, and it's this 22-year-old woman who has asked whether she should go to drama school. She's thinking of going to London to go to drama school. And I hummed and hawed about it, and then I thought, she deserves the truth, actually. She deserves what I believe the truth to be. And it is that thing, I could keep my mouth shut and wax lyrical, or you can sort of go, this is what I've genuinely learned, and which people don't talk about.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not that controversial what I say, but considering calling out anything in our industry up until recently was such a no-no. And particularly as performers, you have this double whammy of literally not having any power within the industry, as in like hierarchically wise. You producers, like you are meat puppets. You are warm props. You're waiting for the call to be allowed to do your job. Then you have the general public attitude towards you, which is increasingly becoming quite radicalized. This word lovey, this insult, the really heavy tarnishing of an entire industry and a subgroup within that industry with the same brush as being sort of enemies of freedom or whatever fucking lunacy they're on about. So God, where was I going with this? But like, you know, you, up until recently, to say anything against anybody, you couldn't, because you'd be worried that you wouldn't get a job.
Yeah.
Like, when you think about that, that's sort of stuff that you hear about before the start of trade unions.
Yeah, or it's a post-colonial thing as well. You know, it's kind of, but also I think there's a very interesting way you're talking about there that kind of manifests somewhat here, but certainly, you know, from the UK is very manifest there. It's kind of like a tarring with the same brush in relation to, say, a class-ridden in industry on both sides of the water, and that reactionary against that from the public is seeing everyone as, you know, an Eton or a Cambridge or a, you know, a landed gentry-esque person, where the people in the industry that kind of are really suffering are people that don't come or can't come from those backgrounds. And it's kind of hard. And I suppose then you throw social media and the lack of discourse in there, and top of that, so you can't talk about anything without, particularly in your line. But you're right about actors not having agency, and I think that's.
But also, going back to what you just said there, who are the people who benefit most from maintaining that system?
Yeah.
You know, it's the same story over and over and over again.
Yeah. And I think,
literally talking about the same story over and over again, we will literally have the same story over and over and over again.
Yeah, but I think that goes right back to the very early part of this conversation. We were talking about the, you know, the canonical and the kind of the sense of the public being very complex and being very literate and being very intelligent, is that you are training them to not only control is a bit strong, but, you know, training them to kind of control the structures, control the systems that are in place. And therefore, you know, the other becomes the other rather than part of that. You know, it's like, oh, that's something different. We'll let that in for a while to examine it.
Yes.
You know,
and we'll laud ourselves for saying, oh, well, we allowed it in.
Yeah, but I do think Lisa's work on Dairy Girls and yourselves, the whole company on Dairy Girls, in an Irish UK context, has kind of went in and kind of torn an awful lot of that down in relation to some of the stuff that's been kind of spoken about. Come here, I won't keep you much longer, but I have to ask you about working on Maeve Higgins with The Extraordinary. I mean, that
isn't it a great film? I love it.
It really is, and what a brilliant character name, Boring Noreen. But yeah, no, it was, and I think again there's a whole swathe of new writing emerging on Ireland and the UK at the moment, and, you know, particularly people who have kind of found they didn't fit in the niche that their kind of profession gave them. Do you know what I mean? Or they had to follow. Maeve's one. I mean, you're beginning to write now. That people can. And I remember when I left college, you know, I wanted to do loads of different things, but that was seen as a bad thing. You must be shy at them all rather than being this. But thankfully, that's kind of different now, or it is kind of the opportunity for it to be different. And I'm going to make a little bit of a joke now, proven by the Dairy Girls edition of the Great British Bake Off. When you got had to use that segue. Sorry. How was that? I mean, that was phenomenal. I mean, the response to that, Jesus Christ.
Can you imagine? I remember in the tent texting my mates going, I don't think that went too well. And they were like, no, I'm sure it went fine. Give us a picture of the cake. And I went, all right, okay. Click. They went, oh, good Lord, what did you do? I went, yeah, it didn't go too well. And at one point they had to turn off the cameras and give me a glass of water because I was just like, running around. It was so stressful. It was so stressful. Nobody was pretending or play acting or anything. That was us genuinely just all having a meltdown.
But did it not fit your kind of scientific brain, trained scientific brain with, come on?
No. Look, I'm hardly that good a scientist, am I?
Well, it made for great television.
Oh, good. Good. I was really nervous. I was genuinely nervous that it would be shown and people would go, oh, what is wrong with her? Why?
Yeah.
She needs a sit down. Like, I did need a sit down several times throughout it.
And just before I leave, you've also performed so I didn't see, but the National Theatre, the Old Vic, the Maxine.
Oh, yeah.
That must have been phenomenal. The 100th anniversary of the women's suffrage, was that kind of a huge thing to be part of?
Yeah, it was. I'd worked with Max at a show, the Royal Court, and she's someone as well who well, not as well. I mean, she's brilliant, but she's been writing quite seriously for the last couple of years as well. And the Old Vic ran these things. I think it was every season they would have 1 or 2 nights, but 1 session of monologues around a theme. And this one was about the centenary of women's suffrage. And Max curated it and brought together an incredibly diverse group of women. And it was really interesting, all the stories that were told, including the band, the Unthanks, who sang various songs. And it was just a different, and I've never played the Old Vic. And it was, monologues are, you know, in a way the hardest thing to do, because the basic thing in acting is like, why speak? What's the impulse to speak?
Yeah.
And with a monologue, it's always a teensy bit contrived. I'm about to do my monologue now, and I as I've gotten older, I've gotten a bit more cranky and contrary. So if I can't feel it, I find it very hard to pretend. Just literally my job.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not. That's not what you said it was. That either.
Yeah.
But also, you know, brilliantly, you were part of the Dear Ireland, you know, recently, and again, not an easy thing to do, but a beautiful series. And again, that must have been, I mean, an awful lot of stuff where we're doing it at the moment. The actors or the musicians that are performing, it's when they finish and they don't hear the applause, they're kind of freaking out completely. And that kind of, so for the audience, we're getting a quasi, you know, live-esque experience. But for the performer, that vacuum space must be really, really challenging.
It is. It's like, I can't believe it's not butter. It's vegan bacon. It's like, you're like, well, it's sort of like theatre, but it's not. But it's definitely not screen work. It's not TV work. So doing Dear Ireland was great. I think it was a really good idea, as to capture a moment in it. And I think what it gave is how people can respond to, not just only in the content, but like, how do we respond to technologically to doing this? And I think we were talking before about the future of theatre and how different it is all going to be. Possibly we are going to need to respond to technology and respond to liveness in a different format, you know. And it just goes to show how quick our audiences learn. Yeah. There is no obstacle for changing fundamental stories. There is no obstacle for movement, for change, for new fantastic things. We've learned during a really short pandemic how to create connection and liveness through a flat screen that isn't television.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I think Dear Ireland was one of the things that captured that really well. And particularly, I was commenting, with kind of listening to one of our own kind of gigs, watching one of our own gigs last night from Access, and the gig was gorgeous, but it was the comments, being able to actually like live chat with people as they're watching something. I think that was beyond the aesthetic beauty of the pieces from Dear Ireland. There was the ability to kind of, you know. That's
what I loved too. Yeah.
Siobhán,
I was thinking about it afterwards and even said, oh, I remember when somebody said da-da-da about that. And they were like, who said that? I went, oh, no one. It was just typed alongside it, you know. You created the memories.
I'm going to let you go. Thanks so much for doing this. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. Wonderful actress, and I can't wait to read and watch your writing in the future.
Yeah, definitely going back to it now. I'm definitely not going out for ice cream.
No, back to work.
Gonna write.
Thanks, Siobhán. Thanks a million.
Thank you.